Today is a lecture, so please make sure you have access to paper and a writing utensil for taking notes. As a heads up, a new adaptation to our lectures in order to make sure that you guys are getting credit for all of the wonderful notes you are taking and to help those grades. I am now going to require you turn in your lecture notes for part of your classwork grade. So for today, for example, pictures of your classwork notes are going to be 40% of your final classwork grade for today. And it's always going to range between like 40 and 50% depending on the type of exit ticket that I have. So because today is 3 multiple choice questions, I'm choosing to make it worth 40%. So that way it's easier in terms of math and just making each multiple choice question worth 20%. So just please make sure that you are submitting photos of your notes. As long as you're turning in the pictures of your notes, you'll be getting at minimum of 40% on today's classwork. We're going to go and transition to the do now. It is 4 multiple choice questions on page 1 and 2 of your classwork. So page 1 and 2 of your classwork, you're going to have 4 minutes to complete these multiple choice questions. Please chat me if you have any concerns or questions about them. 4 minutes, go ahead and get started. Thank you, Serge and Anthony, for getting those cameras on. You guys have 2.5 more minutes. Erica, that's a good question. I'll address that to the whole group when we come back after your do now. 2.5 minutes left. Forty more seconds on the do now. Time is up. Thank you guys so much for getting started on that due now. Just as a reminder, your camera does need to be on for attendance. That is how we are counting your attendance. So your camera must be on in order for you to get the 100% in the tracker. Any questions about the due now? Okay, I'm going to review the answers in just one moment. Sorry, I just lost that tab. Okay, the answer for number 1 is D. The answer for number 2 is D. And number 3 is D. So all 3 questions are D. Any questions about those responses? Great, I do not see any questions. So just before we get started, I wanted to clarify a couple of things. Erica asked a question about your guys' IA. I do have your IAs graded. However, I'm still waiting on confirmation of the curve that I'm giving you guys. So that is why it is not in the grade book. I'm waiting for my curve to be confirmed before it goes into the grade book. So your final grades will be totally updated by the end of the evening. That's just what I'm waiting on. Everything else in the grade book should be accurate. So if you take a look after class at the grade book and want to follow up on anything, everything except for that IA, it should be accurate. So if you have any questions about your grade, feel free to follow up with me and we can discuss. Yes, you guys did good. And just so you know, the big things we're going to be working on is in your argument essay, considering how the evidence you use interacts with each other. That was our biggest gap. And we are going to practice with this more on Thursday. So like you guys did a great job of referencing to foundational documents, but you don't really bring those into conversation with each other. So that's going to be our biggest point of growth that we're going to continue to work on to how you guys respond to that. It was good, Lauren. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started because today is just to give you guys a preview, it's going to be a very odd context lecture. It's a very dense. So please make sure that you are following along because we're going to be talking about bureaucracy, and bureaucracy should be very simple, but it's not. So go ahead and take the next 30 seconds to get your paper set up. You should have on the setup for your paper, the bureaucracy is the title, and today is this November 2nd. Please give me a thumbs up on the screen if you can tell me that you are good to go. You can either visibly show me a thumbs up. Thank you, Adarius. Thank you, Aaron and Isis, for using the virtual. Thank you, Anthony. Great, we are going to go ahead and get started. So the federal bureaucracy is an offshoot of mostly the executive power. So the federal bureaucracy, it falls under the executive power. And the president is the head of this bureaucracy through a structured system of 15 departments. For this next part, make sure you're focusing on what I'm saying. We'll have a moment to copy down the chart near the end of the slide. So make sure we're focusing on what I'm saying right now. So the president's cabinet, so as we know, like the Secretary of State, Secretary of War, the presidential cabinet, is part of this bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is typically merit-based, and merit-based means that people get their job based off of if they're qualified for it. So like you have to apply for the job and be the most qualified person. If you're the head of a cabinet, you are nominated. So for example, you might have somebody that is the head of the Department of Agriculture. They're not necessarily the most qualified, but they were the person the president nominated and got confirmed. So it doesn't mean that they're not qualified, they just might not be the most qualified person. And the cabinet secretaries, their job is to run the cabinet and to advise the president on whatever portion of the cabinet they're in charge. So Betsy DeVos is head of the Department of Education, and it's her job to advise President Trump on education. And while this falls under the executive branch, there is some overlap between the Congress and the president when it comes to interacting with the federal bureaucracy. So for example, as according to this chart, we have things like the cabinet departments, the independent executive agencies, independent regulatory commissions, and government corporations. These all fall under the power of the president and Congress. So for example, to be a part of the federal bureaucracy, you might be the Secretary of Education, or you may just be a postal worker. So the mailman who drops off your mail, or the person that is in charge of the Amtrak, they are technically a federal employee underneath the bureaucracy. So there are a wide range of jobs. Sorry, there we go. However, despite the bureaucracy having some clear guidance, they still face some scrutiny and some unpopularity. You'll often hear the term bureaucrat used as an insult and not as a job. So it is a job that has usually a very heavy negative tone to it. And there are several key issues that opponents of the bureaucracy have. The first is they believe that the bureaucracy has an issue with duplication. So again, one of the complaints is this issue of duplication. And what duplication means is that no agency has exclusive authority over a certain responsibility. So again, no agency has exclusive authority over a particular responsibility. As a reminder, your notes are being graded for today's classwork grade, so please make sure you're taking notes and following along. So for example, for duplication, both the FBI and the DEA seek to apprehend drug dealers. It's not under the purview of just one. Both of these agencies are going after the same people. And so it's believed that this creates redundancy, and people are not able to do their jobs effectively. So again, duplication means that no agency has exclusive authority over a particular responsibility. An example of this being the FBI and the DEA both try to apprehend drug dealers. The next major complaint with the bureaucracy is red tape. So the second complaint is over red tape. And what red tape refers to is the vast amount of paperwork, procedures, and steps that citizens must follow to accomplish a government mandated task. So again, there's a vast amount of paperwork, procedures, and formal steps that citizens have to take to accomplish a simple government mandated task. So for example, an issue that people might have with red tape is whenever I just need to re-register my car, I have to go wait at the DMV for an hour because the government makes me do it. You don't know why, it's just a government rule that you have to do. There's always a reason, but that's the issue with red tape, is it feels like there's a lot of hurdles for people to accomplish something that they have to do. And finally, the last major concern that people have over the bureaucracy is this issue of accountability. So again, the final issue that they have is this issue of accountability. And the issue over accountability is that nobody really knows, or most people are concerned about who is keeping the bureaucracy accountable. So what this means is people are concerned that there are not enough checks and balances keeping the bureaucracy under control. Sorry, I have to plug in my computer. So again, accountability, their concern is that there aren't enough checks and balances keeping the federal government under control, or keeping the bureaucracy under control. Now we're going to look at the history of bureaucracy. So quickly, we're going to go over the history, the bureaucratic history. So in the early days of bureaucracy, so in the early 19th century, the bureaucracy became a place where loyal party leaders were given federal jobs known as patronage. So again, the system of patronage
You're going to repeat that one more time.
Mm-hmm. So again, so we have this issue of patronage, which is where loyal party leaders were given bureaucratic jobs. And this evolves into the spoils system. So for your notes, patronage turns into the spoils system. And what this means is that if you were a loyal party leader, you can get a job that you are not qualified for because you're getting the job based off of merit. Based off of loyalty and not off of merit. This changes, however, with the Pendleton Civil Service Act of 1883. President James Garfield, in the other class I said President Andrew Garfield, and I realized that was not correct. President James Garfield was assassinated by somebody who insisted that he get a patronage job. So again, President James Garfield was assassinated by a party leader that believed he had the right to a patronage job. And this drew attention to the issue of patronage.
What was that last part?
James Garfield's assassination drew attention to the issue of patronage. This results in the Pendleton Service Act of 1883. Again, this leads to the Pendleton Service Act of 1883, which prevents patronage. So this act prevents the practice of patronage and requires that these federal bureaucratic jobs be merit-based. So the Pendleton Service Act, Civil Service Act, requires that bureaucratic jobs be merit-based. Please raise your hand. Is there anything from this slide that you need me to repeat? Yes, Aaron, go ahead.
The last part.
So again, the Pendleton Civil Service Act, passed in 1883, prevents patronage and requires that federal bureaucratic jobs be merit-based. And for the last slide, red tape refers to the large amount of paperwork that people must do in order to accomplish a government mandated task. So the government makes me do this, and so I have to go through all of this red tape or paperwork in order to get it done. Now we're going to look at the responsibilities of the bureaucracy. We're going to look at there are three primary responsibilities of the bureaucracy. The first is writing and enforcing regulations. So again, the first, writing and enforcing regulations. When a law is ratified, it is often really vague. So laws are usually vague. And so it's up to the bureaucracy to determine how they administer the law. So again, laws are usually very vague, and so it's up to the bureaucracy to determine how to administer that law. So the first thing they do is write and enforce regulations. The second thing is enforcement and fines. So the second thing they're in charge of is enforcement and fines. So for example, agencies can impose fines or punishments if different companies are not following the standards. Again, agencies within the bureaucracy can impose fines or punishments if a company is not following certain standards. So for example, if a company is not following the guidelines of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Environmental Protection Agency can pass fines to punish them for not following those regulations. So it's like a different type of law enforcement. Finally, the third responsibility, yes, Erica.
So does that mean law enforcement isn't part of the bureaucracy?
The FBI and like the CIA are, but not like your local state police department. It's only the national organizations like the DEA and the FBI that are. The third and final responsibility of the bureaucracy is testifying before Congress. So people that work for a certain agency in the bureaucracy are often considered experts in their field.
You said testifying to what?
Testifying before Congress.
Oh,
So again, testifying before Congress, federal employees are often considered experts in their field. And so they might be called to provide expert testimony in front of Congress. So what this means is if Congress is debating a new education law, they might call in certain members of the Department of Education to be an expert witness to help inform what they decide to do. So again, they might, if they are considered an expert in their field, they might be called before Congress to testify as an expert witness. Next up, we're going to look at the iron triangle. The iron triangle is a relationship that consists between Congress, bureaucracy, and interest groups. So again, the iron triangle refers to the relationship between Congress, the bureaucracy, and interest groups. And these groups together help create policy. And because of this tight relationship, it can usually be collectively beneficial. So for example, there might be an interest group that, let's say, takes climate change really seriously. So if an interest group takes climate change very seriously, they might endorse or financially support a congressional candidate that also wants to pass reform for climate change. And then in that relationship, they might be able to get additional funding or support from the EPA. So again, as an example, an interest group might take climate change very seriously, provide money and support for the election of congressional members who also take climate change seriously. And then those congressional members could get help from a bureaucratic group like the EPA. Two more slides. Two more slides. Now we're going to look at bureaucratic responsibilities. Members of the bureaucratic branch can often shape the enforcement of policy through instruction, directives, and personal interpretation of the laws. So again, the federal executive branch can shape the enforcement of policies through instruction, directives, and personal interpretation of the laws. Yes, Erica.
Can you say that again, please?
Of course. So again, the federal executive branch officers can shape the enforcement of policy. So again, they can shape the enforcement of policy through instruction, directives, and personal interpretations of the law. And this brings us to this idea of discretionary authority. And discretionary authority refers to the power that Congress has given those departments. Again, discretionary authority refers to the power that Congress has given those departments. However, with discretionary authority, this raises some bureaucratic questions. So for example, when people think about discretionary authority, they might wonder, does this violate separation of powers? because there are no clear checks and balances. They might also wonder, is it democratic for just a few experts to create the rules that all of these different industries must follow? This brings us to our very last slide, which goes into this question of checks and balances. So as we just said, the issue of discretionary authority is there are no clear checks and balances determining whether or not these agencies are acting appropriately. So, in order to make sure that the bureaucracy does not gain too much power or abuse their power, there are new checks and balances put in place to make sure that they follow these rules. The first thing that they do to make sure that they hold the bureaucracy accountable is through congressional hearings. I apologize that this is not on the slide. So the first one that's not listed on the slide is congressional hearings. So every once in a while, a member of a bureaucratic group might be called before Congress to testify about what they've been doing. Sometimes these testimonies in front of Congress are routine, just data collection saying, hey, we just want to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Or Congress might notice the misuse of funds, or that maybe they're not being as effective. So this turns into a questioning to make sure that they are doing what they should be doing. So again, the first thing that they do to ensure that they're following what they're supposed to be doing are congressional hearings. Another way that they complete congressional oversight is through power of the purse. And what power of the purse refers to is how these agencies get their funding. So for example, when Lauren goes to work, she is not paid upfront for the work that it is presumed that she'll do. Instead, she will go in, clock in, do the work, and then she will get compensated later. So that's what power of the purse refers to, is that these agencies are required to do the work and prove that they are accomplishing it before they are getting the funding that they are requesting. Yes, Aaron.
So it doesn't depend on the hours that they do.
Yeah, like that's just, it's not necessarily measured in hours, but more in terms of things that they need to accomplish. So let's say the Department of Education has a new system that they want to use for for federal testing or something like that. They need to go through the work and show what they're going to do before they actually get the money to do it. So it's not necessarily that these people aren't getting paid like their hourly wage. It's that if they have something that they're trying to pass, they need to show that they've earned that money, or that they will earn, or that that money is worth it. The next way that they hold the bureaucracy accountable is through the Whistleblower Protection Act. The Whistleblower Protection Act. This was signed in 1989. And this serves as like an internal checks and balances. So let's say I work for the EPA and I see a misuse of funds or something like that. I would be protected under the Whistleblower Protection Act if I brought that to like a higher up or a member of Congress. So it's basically a way that they can ensure that bureaucratic members' jobs are safe if they notice something is going on. And finally, we have the use of the Supreme Court. Similar to how the Supreme Court can rule on whether or not a law is constitutional, the Supreme Court can also rule if fines or punishments from bureaucracy are fair. So let's say a company feels like it's been unfairly targeted by a part of the bureaucracy. They can take that to the Supreme Court and say, this isn't right, and the Supreme Court can determine if it's allowed.
Can you repeat that last part?
Yes. So the Supreme Court can determine whether or not fines or punishments from the bureaucracy are fair. And so, for example, if a company feels it's been unfairly targeted by a fine, they can raise that issue to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court will determine whether or not the fine is fair. Any other questions or things that you need me to repeat from earlier in the lecture? Or the slide? Ziara, go ahead.
What was the second step after for the responsibilities of the bureaucracy?
The second one was the enforcement and fines, where
Wasn't that the first one?
the first one was writing and enforcing regulations,
Mm-hmm.
and is enforcement of fines.
Okay.
Regulations are where they have like the parts that make the laws doable because laws are so vague. And then enforcement of fines refers to if somebody breaks that law or doesn't follow that regulation, then they're in charge of charging however much money they want for not following that regulation. Anybody else?
Can you repeat the enforcements and fines?
Yes, so enforcement and fines refers to agencies. Agencies can impose fines or punishments if companies are not following those regulations.
Can you repeat the part about where it says bureaucratic responsibilities? Erica had asked you to repeat that earlier, but I didn't hear what you said through directives and what else.
So they can shape the enforcement of policy through instruction, directives, and personal interpretation of the law.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share a link to today's exit ticket into the chat in case you guys do not have it pulled up. Just for a quick reference, as a reminder, where AP Government is different than APUSH, in APUSH, you just need to remember the content. In AP Gov, it's about remembering these theories and these ideas, and then identifying the multiple choice options that exemplify those ideas or theories. So the questions that you're going to be getting in this exit ticket are not directly related to the content, but that content in practice. So just make sure you're reading the questions carefully. Okay, it is in the chat. It is 3 multiple choice questions. Feel free to raise your hand or chat me if you have any questions. Just make sure you're uploading pictures of the lecture into the assignment. Yes, Anthony.
Can you repeat the power of the purse?
Power of the purse means that Congress can determine how much money these agencies get. And they regulate them. Okay, you guys should be working on the exit ticket. Please chat me if you have any questions. Okay, I'm starting to see X tickets come through. Just as a heads up, remember tomorrow's work is asynchronous, so you just need to get up and make sure you complete the work. For tomorrow, it's going to be another short lecture, this time on the Supreme Court. So make sure you are watching the video I upload of my lecture, taking notes, and then the exit ticket. So similar to today, it's going to be watching the video, taking the notes, and this will be graded. Good job, Erin, you got a 3 out of 3. So just please make sure that you complete that work. You're going to need that information. Okie dokie. Okay, Erin, you may go. Nazaya, you may go. Ariana, you may go. Isis, you may go. Again, please make sure you're uploading photos of your notes. Jade, you may go. Janaya, you may go. Kezia, you may go. Lauren, you may go. Anthony, you may go. Ziara, you may go.
Later, Miss Wild.
Bye, Lauren. Dwayne, I got yours. You may go. Kamisha, is this stressful? Just- Naisha, you may go. Okay, guys, I need to end the Zoom call because Calc is going to need this classroom. Feel free to text or call me if you have any questions.